Today we're going to be talking about Magical Meltdown and all the confusing rulings related to it that you may have experienced in previous games you've played, involving not being able to respond to your opponent's card effects or trying to negate the activation of fusion summons. There are even certain cards that actually perform fusion summons that don't count as effects that would fusion summon, and there's some special cases when it comes to using a fusion summon that fusions during Chain Link 1 versus fusion summoning in Chain Link 2 involving the fast effects timing chart. We're going to get into all the details in just a moment. If you're new to the Legacy Crusaders YouTube channel, consider subscribing for more ruling content in the future. There is a playlist up above you might want to look at to see if questions you have about other things related to Yu-Gi-Oh! Have been covered in the past. If I haven't covered them, make sure you ask in the comment section in order to maybe get a video made about a subject you have questions about in the future. But otherwise, we're going to get right into Magical Meltdown right now. So Magical Meltdown is a field spell card that searches for Alistair the Invoker when it is activated. Not relevant to what we're talking about today. Secondly, the activation of cards or effects that fusion summon a fusion monster cannot be negated. Very specific, it says the activation of the card cannot be negated, meaning you can negate the effect with a card like Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss that negates a face-up card, or you can negate a Shaddoll fusion with Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, but you cannot negate the activation of those fusion summons. So a card like Red Eyes Dark Dragoon that would try to negate the activation of a card that would fusion summon could be attempted, but it will resolve without effect. So be careful when it comes to trying to negate the activations of cards that would fusion summon. You can try, and it won't work. So in other words, you are allowed to misplay here, unlike in our previous video on super polymerization. The next thing is your opponent's cards and effects cannot be activated in response when a monster is fusion summoned. And this has to do with a successful summon, and important to determine whether the fusion summon occurred as Chain Link 1 or higher. And we're going to get into all the details right now. So firstly, most traditionally, you would activate Meltdown, normal summon Alistair the Invoker, or search Invocation, and then activate Invocation to fusion summon. Now, your opponent at this point in time cannot negate the activation of Invocation. They can negate the effect, they can flip Imperial Order, they can use Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, they can make it so you can't resolve the effect by activating Artifact Lancia. All of those things are legal things that your opponent can do in response to Invocation. But let's say we successfully fusion summon our fusion monster. Keep in mind, Invocation as a normal spell card will always be activated as Chain Link 1. And for that reason, when the chain resolves in which you activate Invocation, the last thing that'll happen is that a fusion monster will be fusion summoned. So in this case, we're going to say that Invoked Rajin was fusion summoned during Chain Link 1. So at the resolution of the chain, the last thing that happens is that Rajin was fusion summoned. And this is important because Magical Meltdown can miss timing. If the fusion summon monster was summoned as Chain Link 2 or higher, the effect that prevents your opponent from responding to the effects or the summon of a fusion monster would not apply. So specifically on Meltdown, it says when a fusion monster is summoned this way. When is a word that means that it must be the last thing that happens. So because our fusion summon occurred as Chain Link 1, our opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to the summon of that monster. So the summon of the monster, in this case Rajin, occurred as Chain Link 1. And this is the fast effects timing chart. So on the resolution of this chain, which box is that? After you resolve the chain, which is box D, you return to, does a trigger effect activate? So if your opponent had trigger effects that activate, they wouldn't be able to activate them because they can't activate cards or effects in response to the trigger effect. Then you can activate quick effects or your own trigger effects. So if your own trigger effects activate, your opponent can't respond to them. If you had your own quick effects you wanted to activate, which Rajin itself has its own quick effect, if you activate the effect of Rajin, your opponent cannot activate a card in response. You can, though. So your opponent will never get the opportunity to respond to these effects in this chain. So the chain following the fusion summon of the fusion monster, your opponent cannot activate any cards on. If Invoked Rajin is summoned as Chain Link 1, you can activate all kinds of quick effects at the resolution of the chain prior to the open game state. The open game state, you'd be allowed to activate normal spell cards, normal summon monsters, and so on, but by that point, you've passed the point where your monster was fusion summoned, so your opponent can then respond. But in the quick effect chain following the summon of the fusion monster, your opponent cannot activate cards in response. So if you wanted to, after summoning Rajin, you could activate Rajin. Maybe you have a Twin Twister in your hand. You can activate Twin Twister. Your opponent can't respond to the Twin Twister. They can't flip their cards face up. You can activate an Shaddoll fusion or something, try to fusion summon. Using other monsters, your opponent won't be able to respond to it at all. Not that there would be much to do in response to fusion summon when they can't be negated because Meltdown's on the field, but they wouldn't be able to do anything about that. You can super poly, which they already couldn't respond to, but these are all just things that they can't respond to. So because the fusion summon occurred as chain link 1, you can chain all kinds of quick plays and your opponent can't respond to them. They can't respond to a Twin Twister. They couldn't respond to the activation of Ragin. And when that chain resolves, because a fusion summon did not occur as chain link 1, they will be able to perform quick effects. Another monster that you will commonly summon would be like a Goides. If you summon a Goides as chain link 1, you get the option to destroy a card on the field. So Goides says if this card is special summoned or a monster is special summoned to your opponent's side of the field, so there's 2 activation conditions for this one effect, which is to destroy 1 monster your opponent controls. So if you were to summon a Goides while Magical Meltdown is on the field, a Goides will be able to trigger as chain link 1 in the chain following the fusion summon of itself. So if a Goides was summoned via chain link 1, your opponent won't be able to respond to a Goides, and then you can activate other quick effects in that same chain, and your opponent can't do anything about it. Another one is if you were to activate Shaddoll Fusion and try to summon Construct, what would happen is, let's say the fusion material were Wendy and Perform Age Trick Clown, and you fusion summon Shaddoll Construct by activating Shaddoll Fusion. So you'll send these materials from your deck to the graveyard. So you'll send a Wendy and you'll send a Trick Clown, and then you will summon Construct. Now that was all activated in Chain Link 1. So the last thing that happened is the fusion summon was successful. Now, upon the summon of Construct, Construct has a trigger effect. That activates in the chain link in which your opponent's not allowed to respond, because this is when a fusion monster is fusion summoned. But so does Wendy, and so does Trick Clown, and you can put them on the chain in any order and your opponent can't respond to them. All very useful and important. You could do the same thing if you were to try and fusion summon El Shaddoll Apkalon using Shaddoll Fusion, maybe using a Wendy and a Ariel and a Apkalon. The last thing that will happen on the chain of Shaddoll Fusion is that Apkalon will be summoned. You'll be able to activate Wendy, Ariel, and Apkalon and chain link them in any order you want, and your opponent can't respond to them because a fusion monster was just fusion summoned. Now, there is a couple of exceptions to know about how this works, and that is if you were to fusion summon as chain link 2 or higher, the last thing that will happen on the chain is chain link 1. So let's say I activate Twin Twister targeting my opponent's cards, and they don't do anything, and then I activate El Shaddoll Fusion in response to the Twin Twister. Now that means, and I try to summon Apkalon, same scenario as before. Apkalon will be summoned during Chain Link 2, Chain Link 1 will resolve, which is the Twin Twister, and at the resolution of the chain, the last thing that happened is Twin Twister destroyed 2 cards. That means that when you try to activate Apkalon and Wendy and Ariel, your opponent will be able to activate cards and effects in response to those effects. Because, like I mentioned before, Meltdown has a when effect timing, meaning it has to be the last thing that happened. So if you summon a fusion monster, Chain Link 2 or higher, using a proper fusion summon, then your opponent can respond. And the last thing to know is that Verte Anaconda has an effect that copies the effect of another card, which is not the effect of fusion summon. So even though Verte Anaconda can be activated to perform a fusion summon by copying a fusion spell, it always won't be the effect of a card that fusion summons, because the wording on Magical Meltdown says when a monster is fusion summoned this way, meaning an activated card that would perform a fusion summon summons a fusion monster. So it's actually copying an effect. So Verte Anaconda being Chain Link 1, when it summons a fusion monster, your opponent can activate cards and effects in response to it, because Verte's effect is not an effect to fusion summon, even though it does lead to a fusion summon. If you have any questions, make sure you ask them in the comments. Check me out on Twitch. I stream occasionally, usually remote duel tournaments and things like that. Check out the Discord if you want to ask me questions in person, and I will see you guys in a future video.